Hi everyone from Jerusalem. This is Rabbi Ian Pear of Shir Chadash. It's great to be learning with you for Shavuot, and I want to thank Rabbi Tal for giving me the great honor of learning with the Jews of New Zealand. Maybe one day I'll be able to do so in person with you. I want to begin with a fundamental and really deep question about our existence. How do we create? Right, we're all created in the image of God, and as such we're commanded to emulate God. And just as God creates worlds, we're commanded to create worlds. We're supposed to build things and develop things, and not just in the outside world, but internally as well. We're supposed to constantly improve and build ourselves up and build our communities up. How do we do so, especially at a time like now, coming out of our corona cocoons, when the natural tendency is to be very hesitant, to not want to go out and build, but rather look inwards and to sort of focus on ourselves and our families and our own businesses and just protect that which we have, rather than taking the chances of building and creating. So I think part of the answer is provided by the beginning of the Torah. When God creates worlds, the Torah says, Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created the world. So Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach says, it's not in the beginning God created the world, but with beginnings, Bereshit, with the power of beginnings, you can create things. Right? With the power of seeing something as totally new and fresh and the first time, and surrounding yourself with a lot of newness. That's where the creative juices get going, and then you'll be successful. Example was once provided by a great rabbi who had a number of students, and every 6 weeks or so he would change the Maseket, the tractate of Talmud that they would be learning. And his understanding was that if we learn the exact same thing all year long, the students may get bored with the topic and not have the enthusiasm they need in order to be successful at learning. But if we change every 6 weeks, they'll constantly be renewing that enthusiasm, that fresh perspective, that excitement that they need in order to be successful. So that's one answer. You want to create, you want to sort of come out of your cocoon, surround yourself with lots of new things. And that will help you then to create and build with the power of beginnings. That's how you end up creating. But there's a couple of challenges with this idea, and so I want to actually add another idea to complement it. And it's going to be connected to a mitzvah that we engage in come Shavuos. And the reason why I have to give a second answer, I think, is because there are a couple problems with this first answer. First of all, many of the most important things in life, of course, are not new. They're things that we build over a long period of time. In fact, one of the most important verses in the entire Torah, in the Ein Yaakov, which is sort of a collection of the Agadot, of the Talmud, there's an argument about what is the most important verse in the Torah. Some say it's V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Some say it's to love God with all your heart and all your might. And some say it's to bring the continual karban, the tamid, the continual sacrifice. That's the most important. Now, why is that the most important? Because continuity, consistency, that's what's most important in this world. And so, for example, we're not called upon to change our spouse every 6 weeks just because there'd be freshness and newness. That's not really creating. And we're not called upon to start a new job every 6 weeks or build a new community every 6 weeks. No, we try to develop that which we already have. There's something very important in that continuity and that consistency. So that's the first challenge with the answer I gave. The second problem is not everything that's new, everything that appears for the first time, is necessarily inspirational. In fact, there's a lot of failures in the very first time. So how do we make sure that those failures don't influence what we're trying to accomplish? I'll give you again an example from the Torah. Meir Shalev wrote a wonderful book called Beginnings. And in it, he describes the first time a certain concept appears in the Torah. The first time love appears, the first time hate appears, the first time dreams appear, the first time a kiss appears. And as I'm reading through the book, I come to begin to get very surprised because all of these first are not necessarily as inspirational as you might think. Here, play the game with me for just a moment. Where's the first time the concept of love appears in the Torah? So, if you're like many people who have asked this question before, you'll say perhaps it's the love between Jacob and Rachel. Or perhaps you'll go a little bit earlier even and say, no, it's the love between Rivka and her son, Yaakov. Or Yitzchak and his son, Esav. But the truth is it actually appears even before that. When Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac, it speaks about the son that he loves. That's the first time love appears. And what about hatred? Where does the first time hatred appears? You might think that we're commanded to hate evil or evil people. But the first time hatred is mentioned in the Torah has to do with Leah, who we love, who's one of the imahot, one of the mothers. that she was considered the hated one. How about the first time dream appears? So some people would say Jacob, the first time dream appears, right? Jacob and his ladder, or perhaps Yosef and the dreams that he has. But the truth of the matter is, it also appears much earlier. It appears with Avimelech, when Abraham and Sarah go down to Avimelech's kingdom, and he abducts Sarai. God visits him in a dream and tells him, you better straighten up, or else you could be in big trouble. So the first dream in the Torah is not coming from an inspirational figure, but from Avimelech. The first weeping in the Torah, you might think it's Abraham weeping, as it says in the Torah, over Sarah, his beloved wife, when she passes away. But no, it's Hagar who first weeps in the Torah when she's worried about her son Ishmael. And there's so many other firsts that take place that are not as inspirational as you think. They come from places you wouldn't really expect. The first tablets, right? Those are destroyed. It's only the second tablets that end up lasting. And then there's the first king, Shaul. Shaul is the first king. He's strong, he's mighty. The Torah describes him as very regal, but he's not the one who's successful, but rather it's David, the second king. And you can go again and again and again throughout the Torah. Every time there's a first, it's almost as if the Torah is hitting us over the head, trying to teach us, don't be impressed with firsts. Don't think that new things are all that glittery. Beware of them. There's a lot of failures embedded with them. So we have to be careful about just surrounding ourselves with new things, looking at something as if it's the very first time we're experiencing something. Maybe that's not the real lesson we're supposed to take away. So I'd like to offer a second suggestion. And that's connected to, as I said, a mitzvah that we engage in come Shavuot, the mitzvah of bringing Bikurim, the mitzvah of bringing first fruits. What this mitzvah involved is the farmer would harvest his fruits, and he'd bring his first fruits. What does it mean, his first fruits? We'll get to in a moment. And he'd bring it to Jerusalem in a very elaborate ceremony with a lot of pomp and circumstance. There would be singing of the Levi'im, and people would be greeting him on the streets, and he would put his fruits in these beautiful ornate bowls, and there'd be flowers, and there'd be parades. It was a tremendous, wonderful experience. And he would then bring this to the Kohen, and he would recite this very powerful statement that my forefathers used to be slaves, and they struggled, and they suffered, but now I bring here the fruit today. And there's a couple of questions that I would want to ask about Bikurim. And the answers to these questions, I think, shed some light on our initial question as well. So one of the questions, why do we, at this moment of great joy and excitement and happiness, do we recall the pain and suffering of our slavery experience? Right? The slavery in Egypt was akin to the Holocaust. Children were thrown into the river and killed. There was tremendous pain and suffering. Why do we recall that at this moment of our greatest joy? Another challenge. The Midrash says that if you keep the mitzvah Bikurim of bringing first fruits, you will merit coming into Eretz Yisrael. But it's the exact opposite. You see, there's no mitzvah of bringing first fruits until you enter the land of Eretz Yisrael, until you actually own the land. Right? If you don't own the land, you don't have an obligation to bring first fruits. And if you're outside of the land of Israel, there's no obligation to bring first fruits at all. So it's first entering the land of Israel, and then only after that does it make sense to bring your first fruits. How are we to understand this idea? And then there's one last idea that or question, or challenge I want to ask you about Bikurim. Remember I said we'll get back to it later about what does it mean first fruits? So many commentaries say bereshit. The word is also used reshit. These are the reshit of your fruits. Many of them understand it, your choicest, your best fruits, your most beautiful fruits. That's what you should bring. And that makes a lot of sense. But many other commentaries point out the simple meaning. It means bring your first fruits, that whichever came out of the ground first. But here's the challenge. Not necessarily everything that comes out of the ground first is very beautiful. More than that, there's no guarantee that you'll have a successful harvest. Right? There could be a freeze, there could be a famine, there could be a heat wave, there could be infestation from insects, there could be animals that run all over your crops. There's no guarantee at all that you'll be successful after you bring your first fruits. Why not wait a little bit to bring your best fruits? That's a sign that you've had a successful harvest. By bringing your first, many of them that won't look so impressive and it's a little bit too early, why bring that at this point in time and have this wonderful, powerful, beautiful celebration? So I'd like to suggest an answer called something like prescriptive encoding. Now, what does prescriptive encoding mean? Let me back up and tell you about the game Tetris. You're familiar with Tetris? If you're not, one of the advantages of learning not on Shavuot itself is you can go look it up. Tetris is a game where you have to put together on the computer different sized boxes and match them all up, fit them pieces together, and then a line will fall and you'll get ready for the next line. So there was a group of students at Harvard University that did a study where they played nothing else but Tetris for 3 days straight. And afterwards, they would just walk around campus, walk around their daily lives, and the professors would ask them, what do you see? And all of them said they'd close their eyes and they'd see Tetris, they'd see the game in front of them. Some of them were at supermarkets, and they'd be walking down the cereal aisle and they'd see the boxes, and they feel they had to rearrange the boxes so that they'd all fit together, just like the Tetris screen. In other words, they saw Tetris wherever they went. Now this helps explain and justifies something that we like to all call our spam filter. What do I mean by that? You all have computers, you all have email. So you receive many more emails than you're able to read. You could get hundreds of emails. What are you going to do with them all? If you read all the emails, you wouldn't be able to get anything accomplished in life. And so you put them on spam filter. You don't want to see everything because everything's not relevant for you. So there's two ways a spam filter is operating. One is you yourself put an item into the spam filter. The other is that it figures out for itself what you want to see. So if you open up something from a particular sender again and again and again, the spam filter says, oh, you want to see this. Let me bring everything this person writes to your attention. And then there are things that you ignore and you delete all the time. And your spam filter says, oh, you don't want to see that, so I'm not going to show it to you. In other words, that which you did yesterday influences what you will see today. That's the whole concept of that experiment at Harvard with Tetris. Because they kept playing Tetris and they saw it again and again and again, that's what they saw the next day and the next day. So Judaism relies on this idea, this prescriptive encoding. You will see that which you saw yesterday, because that's what you've told your brain you want to see, because we have so much stimuli in our lives. Right, I'm giving this talk to you right now, and there's so many other things going on at the same time. There's a clock in front of me telling me when I have to finish. I'm in the middle of a heat wave in Israel, and our air conditioners are on downstairs, but up here, I have all the exhaust, so that's why you may see me sweating. There's birds singing out here. There's a car going over there. There's so many stimuli. But in order to stay focused, you have to sort of filter out a lot of the stimuli and focus only on that which is important. So how does my brain tell me what's important? Well, it looks, what did you do yesterday? And Judaism understands this concept very well. You see, when you go through life, there's a lot of ways you can look at the world. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad. And you can see both of them in equal measure. But Judaism says, we want you to see God all the time. We want you to see God's blessings all the time. And so we have blessings that we recite all the time. We have 100 brachot all the time that we say every day that reminds us that God loves us and God is concerned about us and God is giving us great kindness every day. And so it trains us, because we are doing those brachot and we're engaged in all different types of mitzvot that bring God into our lives, and see how we should look at people and the positive in people and build community. Because we're doing that all the time, our spam filter says, oh, whenever that comes up again, make sure you see it. Make sure you see the good in a person, the good in a situation. Make sure you see God. That's how our spam filter works, and mitzvot create that spam filter. And so it's not tricking our brains or our eyes to see certain things, only the good, but it is training us, because the good and bad are both there. The mitzvot train us, however, to be able to see the good that not everyone will always see. So how does that connect to Bikurim? We come up with some small little fruit in our bowls, but we make the bowls incredibly elaborate. And we have singing, and we have a parade, and we have all this pomp and circumstance. And so all of a sudden we look at this fruit, and we don't see something small and not so successful and not impressive. We see what it represents in the future. It's like seeing the tip of the iceberg, but also knowing that there's an entire iceberg below. It's seeing the future. It's seeing what it represents, seeing so much more. That's what Bikurim, or I would say Bereshit, could really mean. It means ripening. It's not seeing the best of something. It's seeing the beginning as it's in the process of ripening, and believing that it can continue to ripen and become bigger and better. That's our spam filter. That's our prescriptive encoding. It's enabling us to look at something small, but seeing the impact of it will have in the future. The beginning of the crop, we see the end of the crop. There's many examples of this throughout the Torah. One of my favorites is with Yaakov and Esav. You see, Esau says, I'm going to die anyway. What good does this bracha, this birthright, do for me? When Yaakov tries to get the birthright away from him. The birthright is who is going to own Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. He's not saying, I'm going to die anyway because I'm starving, so just give me that food. Right? If we know the story, it seems that Yaakov appears somewhat inappropriately when he sort of convinces his brother to sell him the birthright for just some porridge. But that's not what's going on. Esau is saying to him, I'm going to die anyway because, you see, you're going to go to Egypt and your descendants are going to be slaves. It's going to be 400 years before they ever return to Eretz Yisrael. So I'm going to die before I ever see the land of Israel inherited. So what good is this birthright for me? It's worth zero. So me getting some food from you is actually a bargain from my perspective. But what Yaakov sees is the birthright that he himself will never see. But he knows that his children and his children's children and his great-grandchildren, they eventually will see it. He sees the Bikurim, the first fruits, but he realizes that they're not the last fruits, and they'll continue on for many, many generations. That's why we talk about slavery when we bring Bikurim. We talk about slavery because maybe you don't believe this concept, that this small little thing is going to grow into something big, that history can change. And so you talk about slavery and the suffering that you can't possibly believe you'll ever get out of. And now you look at your life and you say, wow, I got out of that slavery. Those were my ancestors. My ancestors suffered tremendously. And now I own land in Eretz Yisrael. I'm a farmer and I can bring my first fruits. Right? 75 years ago, we live now. We barely have a government. Things seem challenging. We have a pandemic. But 75 years ago, those of us in Israel, those who are alive, right, they couldn't possibly envision how fortunate we would be today. But at the same time, if they understood the concept of Bikurim, they would understand that the future is actually today. And I'd like to go back to our firsts in the Torah. None of them are inspiring. Avimelech with dreams and love. And you see, those failures are part of the process. You can't get to the dreams of Yosef unless you first have the dreams of Avimelech and see that there's potentially more in that concept. Or the love of Abraham to Yitzchak at the Akedah. You can't get to the love between Rachel and Yaakov unless you first go through that first process. So as we come out of Corona, what I think we're really called upon to do is to have small steps, but realize in those small steps, they're pregnant with tremendous potential. To look at the world as seeds, planting seeds. Not because that's the end of the story, that's all I can do, I can't do any more than that. To have the biggest and the greatest and most glorious dreams possible. But to realize that in order to get that, I have to look at the Bikurim. Just the beginnings, but understand those beginnings are actually part of the ripening process. That's how we create afterwards. Not just by having tons of newness and everything is fresh, but even things that don't look as fresh or as exciting. And we apply that to our relationships, right? We're not getting rid of our spouses or getting rid of our families or getting rid of our communities, but to realize that they could even be greater, that our relationship can be even greater, our communities can be greater, our own commitment to Torah can be greater. But they have to start with small steps that are committed to something even that much greater. Have a great Shavuot. Chag Sameach.